He thought humiliating her would earn him laughs, but in less than 3 seconds, the entire cafeteria would wish they had stayed silent. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The lunch bell had barely stopped echoing through Jefferson High when the cafeteria filled with the usual chaos. Trays sliding across plastic tables, sneakers squeaking against polished tile, and the constant hum of teenage conversations layered over the distant clatter of metal utensils. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, stretching long reflections across the floor, illuminating every movement like a stage no one asked to stand on. And in the far corner, almost perfectly framed by shadow and light, sat Emily Carter. She didn't try to stand out. In fact, she seemed to exist in a quiet space between moments, unnoticed unless someone was looking for a target. Her gray hoodie was simple, slightly oversized, sleeves pulled just past her wrists. Her lunch was modest, a sandwich, an apple, and a small carton of milk, arranged neatly, almost deliberately. She ate slowly, calmly, as if the noise around her belonged to another world entirely. Most students didn't know her. The few who did described her the same way: quiet, polite, forgettable. The kind of girl who never raised her voice, never caused problems, never gave anyone a reason to pay attention. But that was exactly why someone like Jason Reed noticed her. Across the cafeteria, laughter erupted before he even stood up. Jason didn't need to say much to command attention. At 6 feet tall, with a varsity jacket draped over his shoulders and a reputation built on intimidation disguised as humor, he moved through the room like it already belonged to him. His friends followed his lead without question, their voices loud, their energy sharp, feeding off whatever spectacle he decided to create. And today, his eyes locked onto Emily. "Watch this," he muttered, loud enough for the people around him to hear, a grin already forming as he grabbed his tray. It wasn't subtle. It never was. The people nearby shifted slightly, some leaning in, others pretending not to notice, while still watching from the corners of their eyes. Because everyone knew what came next. It always started small, a joke, a careless bump, a staged accident. And it always ended with someone else embarrassed. Jason walked slowly, deliberately, each step echoing just enough to draw attention without announcing intention. His friends trailed behind him, whispering, snickering, anticipation building like a quiet storm. Emily didn't look up. Not when his shadow stretched across her table. Not when the laughter grew closer. Not even when the air around her seemed to tighten, charged with expectation. But something shifted. Subtle. Almost invisible. Her fingers paused for just a fraction of a second against the edge of her tray. Her shoulders remained relaxed, but her posture steadier. Grounded. Like someone who had already calculated what was about to happen. Jason tilted his tray slightly, testing the weight, the balance. "Oops," he said under his breath, though nothing had happened yet. Around them, conversations faded. A few students leaned forward. Others froze mid-bite. Because even before the moment unfolded, something about the silence felt different. Like the room itself was holding its breath. And Jason had no idea. Jason let the word hang in the air just long enough for the people around him to catch it, his grin widening as he shifted his weight slightly forward, angling the tray in his hands as if the outcome had already been decided, as if this moment was just another easy win in a long list of careless victories. And behind him his friends leaned in closer, their laughter already forming before anything had even happened. Because they had seen this pattern before, they knew the rhythm, the setup, the payoff, the embarrassment that always followed. But what they did not see, what none of them noticed, was the way Emily Carter's stillness was not fear but control, the kind of control that did not announce itself, that did not need attention, that simply existed beneath the surface like something trained, something practiced, something waiting. And as Jason took another step closer, the edge of his sneaker brushing lightly against the leg of her chair, Emily finally looked up, her eyes calm, steady, not challenging, not pleading, just aware, and that brief moment of eye contact should have been enough. It should have signaled something different, something unfamiliar, but Jason only chuckled, misreading it completely, interpreting her silence as submission, as hesitation, as exactly what he expected. "You should probably watch that," he said, tilting the tray just a little more, his voice carrying across the now quiet space, and a few students shifted uncomfortably, one girl near the soda machine biting her lip as if she wanted to say something but could not. Another boy lowering his gaze, choosing not to get involved, because no one wanted to become the next target. No one wanted to interrupt the performance once it had already begun, and the cafeteria, once loud and chaotic, had narrowed into a single moment, a single focus point where everything seemed to slow down, the fluorescent lights humming softly overhead, the faint clink of a dropped fork echoing somewhere in the distance. And Jason moved, not fast, not yet, just enough to begin the motion. The tray tipping forward, gravity starting to take over, and in that fraction of a second, something changed. Emily's hand lifted from the table, smooth, controlled, not rushed, her posture shifting just slightly as if aligning with something only she could feel. And for the first time Jason hesitated, just barely, a flicker of confusion crossing his face as the expected reaction did not come. No flinch, no panic, no attempt to shield herself, only that same steady gaze. And it unsettled him in a way he could not immediately explain, but pride pushed him forward, his friends watching, the room waiting, and he committed to the motion, the tray moving further, the contents beginning to slide. And then it happened, not with force, not with chaos, but with precision. Emily's movement was almost invisible at first, a subtle shift, a redirection, her hand guiding the edge of the tray just enough to change its path, her body angling slightly out of reach. And suddenly the moment Jason had planned no longer belonged to him. The balance he relied on slipping away as his own momentum worked against him, and the laughter that had been building behind him caught in the air, unfinished, uncertain, as the outcome twisted into something no one had predicted. And for a heartbeat, no one spoke, no one moved, because the scene unfolding did not match the script they had all expected, and Jason, still mid-motion, realized too late that he was no longer in control of what happened next. The tray did not crash the way anyone expected. Instead it twisted, tilted, and betrayed its owner, the contents sliding unevenly as Jason's grip faltered, his confidence unraveling in real time. And for a split second he stood there caught between intention and consequence, his balance shifting just enough to expose the mistake he had already made, while Emily stepped back with quiet precision, her movements so controlled it almost seemed effortless, as if she had anticipated the exact angle, the exact timing, the exact moment when control would slip from his hands. And the cafeteria, once filled with noise, now held a strange, suspended silence, the kind that follows something unexpected, something that does not fit the script people came to watch. And Jason's friends, who had been ready to laugh, now exchanged uncertain glances, their smirks fading into confusion as they tried to process what had just happened. Because it was subtle, not dramatic, not explosive, but undeniable. The shift in control had already taken place, and Jason felt it, even if he could not fully understand it yet, his jaw tightening as he quickly tried to recover, straightening himself, adjusting his grip, forcing a laugh that came out sharper than intended. "Real funny," he said, though nothing about the moment felt funny anymore. And Emily did not respond right away. She simply looked at him, calm, steady, her breathing even, her posture unchanged, and that silence pressed against him harder than any words could have, because it stripped away the illusion he relied on, the idea that he was always in charge, always one step ahead. And now, standing there with dozens of eyes watching, he realized something had shifted, something small but irreversible, and pride, that familiar driving force, pushed him to try again, to reassert himself, to reclaim the moment before it slipped too far out of reach. "You think you are clever?" he added, his voice louder now, forcing the attention back onto himself, and a few hesitant chuckles followed, weaker this time, uncertain, like echoes of something that had already faded. And he moved again, faster now, less controlled, trying to recreate the setup, to force the outcome he had planned from the beginning. But this time Emily did not wait. Her response came with the same quiet precision, her hand intercepting the motion before it could fully form. guiding his wrist just enough to disrupt the angle, her movement clean, efficient, almost practiced, and Jason froze, not because of force, but because of realization, because for the first time he could feel the difference between what he expected and what was actually happening, and it unsettled him in a way he could not hide, the confidence in his posture wavering, his stance no longer as solid as before, and around them the room leaned into the moment, students watching more closely now, not for a joke, but for understanding, because something about Emily no longer fit the image they had assigned to her. The quiet girl in the corner was no longer just background. She was something else entirely, something controlled, something deliberate, and Jason, still trying to maintain his presence, stepped back half an inch, just enough to create space, but not enough to admit hesitation, and Emily finally spoke, her voice soft, even, carrying just enough to be heard. "You should stop," she said, not as a threat, not as a plea, but as a statement, simple and clear, and that made it worse, because it was not fear speaking, it was certainty, and Jason felt it settle over the moment like a weight, the kind that shifts everything without needing to be loud. And for the first time since he walked across the cafeteria, he was not sure how this would end. Jason's smile did not return this time. It lingered somewhere between forced confidence and something far less certain, his fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the tray as if gripping harder could restore the control he felt slipping away, and the space between him and Emily seemed to stretch, not physically, but in the weight of what had just unfolded, because her words were not loud, not dramatic, yet they carried a quiet finality that cut through the tension more sharply than any shout could have. And for a brief moment Jason hesitated, his instincts clashing with his pride, one telling him to walk away, the other refusing to let him lose face in front of an audience that had already begun to question him. And it was that second voice, the louder one, that pushed him forward again. "Or what?" he said, his tone sharper now, edged with frustration, as if provoking her could force the situation back into something familiar, something he understood, and a few of his friends shifted behind him, no longer laughing, no longer encouraging, just watching, waiting, because even they could sense the difference now, the imbalance that had quietly reversed without anyone announcing it. And Jason stepped closer, invading the space he had already failed to dominate, lifting the tray again, this time more aggressively, more direct, abandoning the subtlety he had tried before, and that was his mistake, because what he saw as escalation was, to Emily, simply a clearer signal, a more obvious movement, easier to read, easier to respond to. And as he moved, she moved, not backward this time, but slightly to the side, her hand rising with the same controlled timing, guiding his motion away from its target with minimal effort, the tray shifting off its intended path once again, and Jason's arm followed the redirected motion, his balance adjusting awkwardly as the momentum he created no longer aligned with where he expected to be, and a quiet gasp rippled through the nearby tables, not loud, but enough to mark the moment, enough to confirm that what they were witnessing was no longer a joke, and Jason felt it, the shift in the room, the subtle withdrawal of support, the way attention had turned from entertainment to observation, and that change pressed against him harder than any physical resistance could have, because it meant he was no longer the one controlling the narrative, and Emily remained exactly where she was, steady, composed, her expression unchanged, her presence no longer invisible but undeniable. And for a brief second their eyes met again, and this time Jason saw something he had missed before, not anger, not fear, but certainty, the kind that does not need to prove itself, and it unsettled him in a way he could not easily dismiss, his posture tightening, his movements losing their previous ease, and the cafeteria seemed to close in around the moment, every sound muted, every movement slowed, as if the entire room was waiting for a decision, for Jason to either step back or push forward one last time. And he chose, driven by habit, by expectation, by the need to reclaim something that had already slipped away, and he moved again, faster now, less controlled, trying to overwhelm the moment, to force it into submission. But Emily's response came just as quickly, just as precise, her hand intercepting his motion once more, redirecting, neutralizing, not with force but with timing, with awareness, with something practiced far beyond what anyone in that room had assumed she possessed. And Jason stopped, not because he wanted to, but because for the first time he realized he could not continue the same way, that whatever advantage he thought he had no longer existed. And around them the silence deepened, heavy and unmistakable, because everyone understood now, even if no one said it out loud, that the outcome Jason expected was no longer possible. Jason's hand remained suspended in the air for a moment longer than it should have, as if his body had not yet caught up with the realization settling into his mind. And the tray he had once held with careless confidence now felt unfamiliar in his grip, heavier somehow, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented, a plan that had already failed, an outcome that had slipped beyond his control. And the silence around him was no longer passive. It was watching, measuring, waiting for what he would do next. And that was something Jason had never truly experienced before, because he had always been the one dictating the ending, always the one deciding when the laughter began and when it stopped. But now the laughter was gone, replaced by something far less comfortable, something that made him aware of every pair of eyes in the room, every subtle shift in posture from the people who had once stood behind him. And he could feel it, that distance growing, that invisible step backward from those who no longer wanted to be part of whatever this had become. And Emily did not move. She did not advance, did not press the moment. She simply remained where she was, her presence steady, her breathing calm, her eyes fixed on him with a quiet certainty that refused to be ignored. And it was that stillness that made everything else feel louder, the faint hum of the lights above, the distant scrape of a chair somewhere across the cafeteria, the soft exhale of someone who had been holding their breath too long. And Jason swallowed, the motion small but noticeable, his confidence no longer effortless, his stance no longer secure. And for a brief second, he considered stepping back, letting the moment dissolve, pretending it had been nothing, but the weight of expectation, of pride, of the image he had built over time, held him in place, unwilling to let him retreat so easily. And yet he did not move forward either, caught between two choices that no longer seemed simple. And Emily spoke again, her voice as even as before, not louder, not sharper, just clear. "It is not worth it," she said. And there was no challenge in her tone, no attempt to provoke, only a quiet statement that carried more authority than any raised voice could have. And that was what shifted something inside Jason, because it was not resistance he was facing, it was understanding, the kind that saw through the situation entirely, the kind that did not need to prove anything. And for the first time since he had walked across the cafeteria, he realized that continuing would not give him what he wanted. It would not bring the laughter back. It would not restore his control. It would only expose him further. And that realization settled heavily, undeniable and immediate. And around them the room remained still, no one interrupting, no one stepping in, because everyone sensed the turning point, the moment where the outcome would finally be decided. And Jason slowly lowered the tray, the motion almost reluctant, as if he was letting go of something more than just an object. And his shoulders tightened, his jaw set, but he did not speak, not right away, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already happened. And Emily watched him for a moment longer, then simply returned her attention to the table, as if the situation had already ended in her mind, as if it had never been anything more than a brief interruption. And that quiet dismissal, that lack of reaction, landed harder than anything else, because it stripped the moment of importance, leaving Jason standing there with nothing to hold on to. And the cafeteria, still silent, seemed to exhale all at once as the tension finally broke, leaving behind a realization that settled into every corner of the room, that strength did not always announce itself, and sometimes the quietest person in the room was the one who needed the least to prove. The moment did not end with noise or confrontation. It dissolved quietly, almost imperceptibly, like tension slipping out of the room one breath at a time. And Jason stood there for a second longer than anyone expected, the tray now lowered completely at his side, his posture no longer commanding but uncertain, as if he had stepped into a version of himself he did not fully recognize. And around him the cafeteria slowly began to move again, chairs scraping lightly against the floor, conversations restarting in cautious fragments. But the energy had changed. It was softer, more aware, and every glance that passed between students carried the same unspoken realization. Something had shifted in a way that could not be undone, and Jason felt it in the way people looked at him, not with fear, not with admiration, but with something quieter, something closer to evaluation, and it unsettled him more than he would ever admit, because for the first time he was not the center of the moment. He was part of it, exposed within it, and he exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair as if resetting himself, trying to reclaim some version of control, but the rhythm was gone, the timing broken, and no matter what he said or did next, it would not return. And that realization pressed against him until he finally stepped back, just one step, small enough to appear casual, but clear enough for anyone watching to understand, and his friends, who had once crowded close behind him, now gave him space without being asked, their earlier confidence replaced by a quiet distance, and no one laughed, not even a forced attempt, because there was nothing left to laugh at, and Emily, already seated again, picked up her sandwich as if nothing had happened, her movement steady, unhurried, her focus returning to something simple, something ordinary, and that contrast made the moment even more striking, because while everything around her had shifted, she remained exactly the same, grounded, composed, untouched by the need for attention or validation. And across the room, a teacher near the exit had paused, watching just long enough to understand that whatever had occurred had already resolved itself without escalation, without chaos, and they turned away, allowing the space to settle on its own. And Jason glanced once more in Emily's direction, his expression unreadable now, not anger, not confidence, something in between, something processing, and he opened his mouth as if to say something, then stopped, because the words did not come, or perhaps because he understood that speaking would not change anything, and instead he turned, walking back toward his table with a pace that was neither rushed nor relaxed, simply measured, as if he were choosing each step carefully. And the students nearby watched him go, some with curiosity, others with quiet understanding, because they had seen enough to know that the balance of the moment had shifted in a way that did not need to be explained. And Emily finished her bite, reached for her milk, and took a small sip, her gaze never following him, her attention never leaving the simple act in front of her. And that was what lingered in the room long after the moment passed, not the near incident, not the tension, but the quiet control, the kind that does not demand recognition, the kind that exists regardless of who is watching. And as the noise of the cafeteria returned to its usual rhythm, the memory of that silence remained, subtle but permanent, a reminder that strength does not always need to prove itself, because sometimes it is already understood without a single word. The rest of the lunch period moved forward, but not in the same way it had before, because even as conversations slowly rebuilt themselves and the familiar noise returned to fill the cafeteria, there was a subtle shift in how people looked at Emily Carter, not openly, not in a way that would draw attention, but in quiet glances, in moments where eyes lingered just a second longer than usual, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed with the image they had carried for weeks. And Emily, for her part, did nothing to feed that curiosity. She finished her meal at the same steady pace, folded her napkin neatly, and gathered her things without urgency, as if the entire moment had been nothing more than a passing interruption, and that calm refusal to acknowledge what had happened only deepened the effect it had on everyone else, because it denied them closure, denied them a reaction, denied them the drama they expected. And across the room Jason sat with his friends, but the dynamic had changed. The easy laughter that once surrounded him now came in short bursts, forced and inconsistent, as if no one was entirely sure how to return to what had been normal just minutes earlier. And Jason himself was quieter, his posture more contained, his gaze occasionally drifting toward the corner where Emily had been sitting, though he never held it long enough to be noticed, and each time he looked, he seemed to find the same thing: nothing, no acknowledgement, no glance in return, just the absence of attention, and that absence lingered with him more than anything else, because it meant the moment had not elevated him, had not even truly involved him in the way he had intended. It had simply revealed something about him, and about her, that he could not easily undo. And as the bell rang signaling the end of lunch, the sharp sound cutting cleanly through the room, students began to stand, chairs shifting, trays being cleared, the usual rhythm of transition taking over. But even then, the space around Emily seemed to move slightly differently. People stepping aside just a little sooner. Conversations pausing as she passed, not out of fear, but out of awareness, as if everyone understood, without saying it, that she was not what they had assumed. And Emily walked through it all without hesitation, her steps measured, her gaze forward, her expression unchanged. And as she reached the exit, she paused briefly to adjust the strap of her bag, her movements simple, grounded, and entirely her own. While behind her, Jason remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, watching the space she had just left, his jaw tightening slightly as he processed something he could not yet put into words. And one of his friends finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Man, what was that?" And Jason did not answer right away, because the truth did not come easily. It did not fit into the confident persona he had built. And when he finally did respond, his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Nothing," he said. But even he did not believe it, and neither did anyone else at the table. Because they had all seen it, felt it, the shift that had taken place in a matter of seconds. And as Jason stood, grabbing his bag with a quick motion, he moved toward the exit, not with the same ease as before, but with a subtle tension that followed him. And the hallway beyond the cafeteria stretched ahead, filled with students moving between classes, unaware of the moment that had just reshaped something small but significant. And somewhere within that flow, Emily had already disappeared, blending once again into the background. Except now, she was no longer invisible, and the memory of what had happened would follow her, quietly, persistently, carried in the minds of everyone who had been there. Because sometimes, the most powerful shift is not the loudest one, but the one that changes how people see you, without you ever needing to say a word. The hallway carried a different kind of noise than the cafeteria, sharper, faster, filled with the rhythm of lockers closing and footsteps echoing against polished floors. But even within that movement, something from lunch followed quietly behind, carried not in words but in glances, in the subtle way students leaned toward one another, whispering just enough to share what they had seen without drawing too much attention. And Emily Carter walked through it all without reacting, her pace steady, her posture unchanged, her presence as calm as it had been before any of it happened. And yet the space around her no longer treated her the same, because recognition had replaced assumption, and even those who did not fully understand what they had witnessed could feel that something about her did not fit the easy labels they had assigned. And as she reached her next classroom, she paused briefly at the door, adjusting her sleeve with the same quiet precision she carried in every movement, then stepped inside as if nothing outside that room mattered. While down the hall, Jason moved more slowly than usual, his steps measured, his expression tightened in thought, because the moment in the cafeteria had not ended when he walked away. It lingered, replaying itself in his mind in fragments he could not quite piece together. The way she had moved, the way she had not reacted the way he expected, the way the room had gone silent without anyone telling it to. And it unsettled him, not because he had lost control in that moment, but because he had not even understood when he lost it. And that uncertainty followed him into his next class, where he sat down with a heavier presence, his usual ease replaced by a quiet tension that his friends noticed but did not comment on, because even they were still processing what they had seen. And across the school the story began to shift, not exaggerated, not dramatic, but precise, passed from one student to another with careful attention to detail, because the truth did not need embellishment. It was already enough. And by the time the final bell of the day approached, Emily's name had been spoken more times than it ever had before, not loudly, not publicly, but enough to change how people thought when they heard it. And when classes ended and students began to filter toward the exits, the afternoon light stretching long across the parking lot, Emily stepped outside into the cool air, the noise of the school fading behind her as she walked toward the far end of the lot, where fewer students gathered. And there, just beyond the usual crowd, a small training facility sat quietly, its windows reflecting the golden light of the setting sun, a place most students passed without noticing. But Emily did not pass it. She turned toward it with the same calm certainty she had shown all day, pushing the door open and stepping inside, where the environment shifted instantly, the air carrying a different weight, quieter, more focused, and a few people already inside glanced up briefly, nodding in recognition before returning to their routines. And Emily set her bag down near the wall, her movements familiar, practiced, as if she had done this countless times before, and she took a slow breath, grounding herself in the space, her shoulders relaxing in a way they had not needed to all day. And for the first time since the cafeteria, there was no need to hold back, no need to remain unnoticed, because here, she was not the quiet girl in the corner, she was simply herself, and the truth that had only been hinted at earlier now existed fully, not for others to see, but because it had always been there, waiting, steady and unchanged, regardless of who believed it or not. Inside the training facility, the noise of the outside world no longer followed, replaced instead by a steady rhythm of controlled movement, soft footwork against padded flooring, and the quiet focus of people who train not for attention but for discipline. And Emily Carter stepped fully into that space with a familiarity that required no announcement, no introduction. Her presence acknowledged with simple nods from those who understood what she represented without needing explanation. And she moved toward the center of the room where the light from the high windows fell cleanly across the mats, setting her bag aside with care before rolling her shoulders once, loosening the tension that had never truly settled during the day. And across from her an instructor glanced up, offering a brief smile, not surprised to see her, not curious, just aware, because here Emily was not an unknown, she was not overlooked. She was someone who had earned her place through repetition, through quiet effort that no one outside these walls had ever witnessed. And as she stepped forward, her posture shifted in a way that was subtle but undeniable, grounded and precise. The same control that had redirected a moment in the cafeteria, now fully visible in every small adjustment of her stance, every measured breath, every calculated movement that followed. And she began her routine, not rushed, not forceful, but exact, each motion flowing into the next with a clarity that spoke of years of practice, of discipline built in silence, of strength shaped not for display but for mastery. And those around her continued their own training. Yet there was an unspoken awareness of her presence, the kind that comes from recognizing skill without needing to comment on it. And outside, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot, the events of the day settled into memory, not as something dramatic or exaggerated, but as something precise, something that had revealed more than it had shown. And back at the school, Jason Reed walked toward his car with slower steps than usual, the earlier confidence replaced by reflection, his mind replaying the same sequence over and over. The moment he lost control, the way she had moved, the way she had not needed to prove anything to anyone. And for the first time, the question was not how he had failed, but why he had assumed he would not. And that question lingered longer than any embarrassment could have, because it pointed to something deeper, something he had never considered. And as he reached his car, he paused, resting his hand briefly on the door, staring out across the lot without really seeing it, because his attention was still somewhere else, caught in a moment that had quietly changed how he understood things, not through force, not through confrontation, but through clarity. And back inside the training facility, Emily completed her final movement, her breath steady, her focus unwavering, before stepping back and relaxing her stance, the session ending not with applause or recognition, but with the same quiet respect it had begun with. And she picked up her bag, offering a small nod to the instructor before turning toward the exit, stepping back into the fading light of the evening with the same calm presence she carried everywhere, unchanged by what had happened, unaffected by who had witnessed it, because her strength had never depended on recognition. And as the day came to a close, the lesson it left behind settled not in words, but in understanding that respect is not something you demand, and strength is not something you announce. And sometimes, the people who seem the quietest are the ones who have already mastered the most.